Hello, welcome to week one of the patrol procedures class. This week I kept it pretty light. There's just some videos talking about trying to give a little bit of a window into what police work is like. And it's really difficult to do that because it's just, there's just so many aspects of the job. And so if if your only exposure to law enforcement is like TV, like dramas, police dramas on TV and, cops and live PD, that kind of thing. Um, that shows elements of the job, right? But it's also like in the case of like the TV shows, it's obviously produced for television and for entertainment value. And so it's leaving out the less interesting and less appealing, aspects of the job. And then you've got like live PD and cops that are actually showing you real police interactions, but they're kind of showing you the highlight reel, right? They spend more time with those agencies than what they film, right? And they're just kind of cutting to the highlights, the things that they believe their viewers find interesting or, entertaining. And so the real job, can be very boring. You know, the last time that I covered a patrol shift, literally nothing happened. I think we had like three calls for service the whole night. It was a 12-hour shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I did a few traffic stops, what we call self-initiated activity, just to kind of break up the boredom and, stuff like that. And that was it. Nothing particularly fruitful came, from that evening. It was, you know, uneventful, right? Um, but I mean, I've worked shifts where, you're really getting stretched to your limit the whole night, that it's just nothing but crazy calls, and so it is an aspect of the job that many people are drawn to, which is the excitement, the fact that it's not just a normal 9 to 5 office job, office type job, that there is an opportunity to do, something very productive and fruitful and good, you know, and then there's um, the less interesting and boring aspects of the job are just, well, it's necessary, right? You can't, you can go and chase down the bad guy and get him into custody and bring him in, but then you're going to have to write the report, right? That's going to justify keeping him in jail or putting him in prison or whatever the legal system decides that they want to do with him, right? If you just go out there and focus exclusively on doing the fun stuff, right? And you don't do your due diligence in putting, your report together, then what have you really accomplished, right? If the case gets dropped or dismissed or thrown out because you did sloppy work, you know, then I mean, what did you really accomplish? So that being said, um, I can, talk a little bit about my own experience because that's um, really probably the best I can do, you know. So I started out working as a corrections officer at the Pettis County Jail in 2008, and I spent 4 years there working in the jail. And about a year in, I went to the police academy and got commissioned as a law enforcement officer, but there weren't any patrol spots open, so I stayed in the jail. And at that time, anyway, the county had some kind of budget issues and things like that. And so there didn't appear to be any openings going to happen anytime soon. So I started applying at other agencies. And not that there's anything wrong with working in corrections. There's not. It's just I wanted um, patrol, you know. I wanted to work on the street. And so I applied around and I got um, a job in Jefferson City at Capitol Police. And they are the state law enforcement agency, but they are limited to the state government. So basically state-owned property in Cole County and the Capitol itself and the governor's mansion and stuff like that. And so I worked there, and it was an improvement, in my mind of or overworking in corrections. But the issue there was that they really only were really busy during session, and that's less than half the year. It's about 5 months out of the year. And so the remaining parts of the year, it was a pretty boring job, you know. I kind of likened it to, when I did leave, I went to Cole County. I basically said I got sick of patrolling empty parking lots, and I did get to do kind of a cool detail there, and that is executive protection for the governor's mansion. Um, and that was interesting, but still at the same time, I really wanted to do, um, patrol work. So I went to Cole County, and then while I was at Cole County, I got injured in the line of duty. I had to have surgery on my shoulder, surgery on my hand. And at the time, I had also worked online and I had earned a master's degree. And my intention with that was that whenever I got towards the end of my career, I wanted basically something I could transition to. And so I thought I've always enjoyed teaching. I teach defensive tactics, um, and so I kind of wanted to have that in my back pocket. But when I got injured, I got an opportunity while I was still on light duty for that. I got an opportunity to teach full time at Valley. And at the time, also, my wife, she had been working for the state of Missouri as an investigator, but she'd always wanted to be in law enforcement too. But two of us in the profession wasn't going to work out with our young family. So I made the decision to take the job at Missouri Valley, and she started working at um, Sedalia Police Department. Well, she went through academy first. Anyway, and I taught at Valley full time for 5 years. And um, so I say all that to say this, and that is when I was a young man, first starting out, the rigors of the job didn't bother me so much because I was young, I was single. I could basically throw everything I had at the job, and I didn't really necessarily need to have a lot of a personal life outside the job. But when I got married and had kids, it started to wear on my family. The aspects of the job that people don't necessarily think about when they're thinking about law enforcement. They're thinking about what do you do? They're not thinking about the fact that you're covering 24/7, 365. You're working, uh, um, you're working on particular shifts. When I very first started out, we were on 8-hour shifts, and I worked overnights. And that did not bother me at all because I'm not a morning person. And so my most productive part of my day generally is um, in the evening anyway. And so it kind of worked out. Um, I worked 3 to 11 for a while. That wasn't bad. Um, and then I also, when I was at Cole County, we worked 12-hour shifts and we rotated every 3 months. And that was the roughest one for me because you couldn't get used to it. Every time you were, okay, you settle into a routine with this shift and then it's opposite on its ear, you know, instead of working, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you're working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then it just keeps going back and forth indefinitely. And that was rough. But then there's other aspects of it. Even when I was on a schedule or a shift that I liked, it's like they'd be short and they'd be asking to work overtime. And, um, you know, you're supposed to get off at a particular time, but you also have obligations. So like if you're supposed to get off at 6, but you stop a drunk driver at 5, even 5 o'clock, right? Are you going to get off on time? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how smooth that goes, right? If you get somebody that's cooperative, they do the SFSTs, they blow, at the station, you don't have to go get a blood draw or get a warrant or anything like that. And you've done a lot of those kind of reports where you kind of have a template to start with and stuff like that. Maybe, you know, but most likely you're going to be working at least an hour over, you know, or more. Um, and it wears on you. And like I said, when there's other people that it impacts, it makes it kind of hard because on the one side, it's like, well, it's my job. I've got to do it, kind of thing. But then, you know, it's dumping on somebody else. And, it can get to where, it can cause strife. I actually remember the day that I did get hurt. We had fought about it. Yeah, we had argued about it because I was working an overtime shift, and she's like, "Why can't you ever say no to that?" And we kind of argued about it, and so if you let, you know, it can, like I said, it's a high stress job. I will say that when when I stepped back, I just kept a reserve commission during that time, and she got into the job, and it started to go the other way around, and obviously I had, you know, patience with it because I knew it was coming and I knew, but um, it also I think helped her to understand then why I was the way I was. Um, but anyway, I'm just kind of rambling at this point. Sorry. But that's what the job is. It's a job that can very easily kind of consume your identity if you let it. It's a job that um, you know kind of demands more of your time. The schedule at best is going to be irregular. And at worst, if you're at a department that's, you know, very short-handed and stuff like that, um, it can be very demanding, where you don't have a choice, and you do have to work over or whatever. Um, and then kind of to finish up my background, 3 years ago, um, I got to come back full time on the sheriff's office here in Pettis County, where I started originally, and work investigations full time. And that's been kind of a dream come true for me because that's always been, I think, my ultimate career goal anyway. And so I did, and so an advantage of that is that normally, I'm working, you know, a more predictable schedule, but we have on call. because obviously crime happens when it happens. And so if there's a need to call out a detective at 2 in the morning, if I'm on call, guess who's getting that call at 2 o'clock in the morning to go out and deal with whatever bull crap's going on, you know? Um, so, but like I said, one of the things that I've really come to terms with over the years is that yes, there's times when the job makes demands of you that you really don't have a lot of say so in, right? That like I say, if I'm on call, right, and I get called out, I have to go. It's part of the job, right? Um, and so, but I have learned not to let that dominate more than it should, um, for lack of a better way of saying it. And it's really um, helped because I want to have time with my kids. I want to have time at home. I want to, have an identity outside of my job, you know, and because even if I even if I sacrifice everything, for the job, you know, if I quit, they're just going to replace me and move on, right? It's like they might throw me a party or, you know, bid farewell or, you know, 2 or 3 years down the road, someone like, oh, I miss so and so. They used to work here, kind of thing. But like the job will go on without you. And so you don't need to, you know, uh, wrap up your identity in it because you may not be able to do it for as long as you want to. And I also have seen guys that stayed in it too long, you know, and ended up having to retire for health reasons, because they, you know, went out on the range and they couldn't get up from the kneeling position or something like that. It's like, you know, it's a great job, but it's a job. And if I need another job, I'll go get another job and I'll learn to like that. So, that being said, that's it for this week. Like I said, there's just some videos to watch, and there's also a discussion board that can be anything you want to talk about. Um, it's basically what did you find the most interesting or least interesting, or any other thing that you have questions about or want to talk about. That's fine. If any of you all have a desire to be in law enforcement, you can mention that too. Um, it's really whatever you want to do. And then don't forget also there's an introductory video in uh, the Start Here module. Uh, Basically, I at the top of that I have my own introductory video, and then somewhere down towards the bottom there's that, and then there's also a an ethics quiz that the school made that everybody has to take for online classes. So make sure you take that, post an introductory video, and then on the discussion board, you've got two options. One option is that you can type it out. That's fine. There's also an option where you can insert media and you can post a video in there. I'm good with it either way, whatever you feel like you want to do. That general discussion board will be every week. Just anything you want to post. Um, it's it's kind of my way of trying to have some interaction between us and stuff. I'll try to I'll try to respond, you know, uh, and answer any questions that you have, or just acknowledge that I read it or watched it or whatever. Because again, we with this not being a face-to-face class, we're missing that interactive part that is normally present. So have a good week. I'll see you next week.